में है मुझे, लेकिन वो कहाँ से करना है।
हाँ, अब आप वीडियो के साइड में आप देखिए एक,
and I assure you that it's going to be even better for the next couple of quarters of the hour. My name is Dhriti Gaur and I'm a BTech Biotechnology third year student at Bennett University. And I will be moderating most part of the session today for all of you. Before moving to the main talk, I would quickly like to first introduce you all with the layout of the event. So right after I finish, we will have the welcome address from Dr. Vinod Shastri, followed by the fireside chat between our guest speakers. Following that, we will have a question and answer session led by students from MBA program at BU. And finally, concluding with the vote of thanks by Mr. Sudhanshu Verma, Chief Operating Officer at BU. It is perhaps the most uncertain times in our lives, I believe, that when and if we embrace, it would lead to best possible transformations. This also lays the foundation to our today's talk, come fireside chat session on the topic economic impact of COVID-19, an uncertain event, of course, in the era of digitalization. The changing world of work and creating high value for businesses in a low growth world. I feel great pleasure to welcome you all to today's session. And to make sure that we all get the best learnings out of the discussion today, we have with us two very eminent personalities in the field of teaching, strategy, management, counseling. Mr. Thomas Kuruvela, he is the member of the global board of Arthur D. Little, an international management consulting firm, and is also responsible for its operations in the Middle East. He is the head of the strategy and organization practice in South Asia and the Middle East, and leads many public sector transformational engagements on economic development and digital transformation across different industries. And which is why we feel that he is going to be a perfect fit for today's talk. He is also a part-time faculty at IIM Ahmedabad, Bangalore, and Udaipur, India, for programs covering international business strategy, family conglomerate strategy and governance, strategy or management consulting. Mr. Kuruvela has a BTech degree in electrical and electronics from TKM College of Engineering, Kerala, and MBA in strategy and finance from Asian Institute of Management and Melbourne Business School. We welcome you with great honor and pleasure, sir. Next in the limelight, with an awe-inspiring personality, we have Dr. Prabhu Agarwal, Vice Chancellor, Bennett University, with close to 30 years of experience in both academia and industry. Dr. Agarwal has held various senior level positions, including Assistant Dean, Mason School of Business, College of William and Mary, Williamsburg, Virginia, USA, Chief Learning Officer for the Jindal Steels and Power Limited Group companies, among others. Dr. Agarwal is an active teacher, speaker, and consultant in the areas of operational excellence, supply chain optimization, business analytics, and breakthrough performance. Dr. Agarwal has a Bachelor of Technology degree from IIT Kanpur and an MBA and PhD degree in Operations Management from the Foster School of Business, University of Washington, Seattle, USA. We welcome you, sir. I hope by the end of the session, my pleasure, sir. I hope by the end of this session, we all go back with some amazing insights and learnings from both of you today. So without wasting a second, I would like to humbly request Dr. Vinod Shastri to deliver the welcome address.
Thank you so much, Dhriti. It's great listening to you. You yourself have great communication skills and it's very much on display. So I welcome Mr. Kuruvela to Bennett University and of course our own Vice Chancellor, Dr. Prabhu Agarwal and Mr. Sudhanshu Verma. And I take this opportunity, Mr. Kuruvela, to introduce to you Bennett University. You of course are aware that it's a Times Group initiative, and Times Group itself is over 180 years old, and that's the kind of legacy that we inherit, and which is a great advantage, great privilege, and at the same time immense responsibility. I mean, people would just expect us to be number one. Because we are number one in media, people would expect Bennett University, though it's a very young university, to be number one. And to this end, we have not left any stone unturned to actually live up to that expectation. And there are, very wonderful steps that we have taken. So those I would just like to share with you. So almost over 90% of our faculty members come with a PhD degree. So that itself should tell you some kind of a story. And are these just numbers in terms of recruitment? Definitely not, because we have seen excellent publications coming out of it, and over 300 publications in a short span of about 5 years. That's the kind of focus that the university has entered into this world. And there are a few other things which are very unique to this university. One is, it's probably, arguably, the first university in India that has come into existence along with a center for innovation and entrepreneurship and an on-campus business incubator with a clear focus on innovation and entrepreneurship. And even on that front, our students have been, launching startups left, right, and center. And again, within a short span of 3 years, first 3 years itself, students have raised investments of over rupees 20 crores. So that's the kind of progress that we have seen over these years. And typically we are focusing on building a very unique culture, a culture where everybody takes pride in each other's achievements, and we call that as an emotional stake. So everybody picks an emotional stake in each other's achievements and challenges. So that's how we are trying to create a very unique identity for ourselves. And it has definitely paid dividends. And very recently means yesterday itself, I was having a 2-hour meeting with our sports stars. And what we have realized is, of course, we have immense amount of focus and infrastructure in the sports arena, which is already showing. So the kind of sports stars that we are attracting to the university is again very unique within the first few years. And we have had illustrious sports officers donning that hat and taking up that role, and it's all really showing. So infrastructure, of course, it's there, it's a given, but beyond that, I think Bennett University is about culture, it's about quality, and it's all about students like Dhriti, who is representative sample of what kind of students we have. So close to about 4,000 students, and we already have 4 schools, engineering, of course, and then we have School of Management and Times School of Media, and we also have a School of Law. And within such a short time, all of these have become very sought after schools. And there are laurels that students are bringing in all kinds of field, be it sports, be it cultural, be it various competitions, inter-university competitions. So that's what I would like to say. We are about a very unique culture, and you will hear a lot about us in the years to come. So I wanted to keep it short and give you a very quick perspective of the dimensions, various dimensions of the university. So over to you, Dhriti, and we may start what everybody is waiting for, actually.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Very,
you so much.
very impressive, and thank you very much for sharing these inputs. It's very, very useful.
Thank you.
Before we get into the discussion. Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. It was wonderful hearing from you. So moving on to the next most amazing part of the session. Me being a student of biotechnology, I feel that this field has observed great thrive in the industry ever since the impact of coronavirus came into action, with more than 150,000 papers getting published in a year and so many more under clinical trials, I feel. So while there are sectors which are witnessing unexpectedly huge growth economically and even socially, we also see that there is a simultaneous decline in the long established businesses with an uncertain future. GDPs are decreasing, mismatch in the demand and supplies worldwide, which ultimately lands us to the very issue of today's discussion, impact of COVID-19, the economical impact of COVID-19 in the digitalization era. Keeping the same thought in mind, I would now like to move the event to the next phase, the most awaited one. With great honor, I invite Mr. Thomas Kuruvela and Dr. Prabhu Agarwal to commence the fireside session and enlighten us all about the economic impact of COVID-19 in the era of digitalization.
I said, thank you, Dhriti. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Well, first and foremost, thank you for arranging this fireside chat with Mr. Thomas Kuruvela. Welcome you to our fireside chat, sir. It's a pleasure to have you, and we appreciate the time you're taking to interact with us. Just to give you a little perspective, this chat is being organized by a career services cell, and clearly the focus is on students who are at the university and are, of course, like Dhriti put it, studying and graduating in the COVID era, which is such an unprecedented event. And I think we would like to focus our discussions around what do you as a industry expert have to say about what's going on around us? How should students think about it? What are some of the opportunities that will come post-COVID? If there is a post-COVID, what is the new normal? How do you really think it's a low growth and world, or is it a different world and not a low growth world? And how should students think about all these issues? So I think that's kind of the context I'd like to bring to this chat. And I'd like to start with asking Mr. I'll just call you Thomas if you're okay.
Absolutely, please. Yeah.
Okay, so Thomas, just why don't you share with us in a couple of minutes your journey at Arthur D. Little and Arthur D. Little's story, just for the just to put everything in context for us.
Right. I hope maybe most of you hopefully may have heard of Arthur D. Little, but I'll still keep it quite short. Arthur D. Little is actually the first consulting firm in the world, and many people, I don't know whether everybody knows that it started in 1886 in MIT campus, right? And it was started by a chemical engineer from MIT. His name is Arthur Dehaun Little, and that is where the name of the firm came from, Arthur D. Little, right? So, and actually in the beginning, it was more like an outsourced research and development lab. There was no strategy consulting, management consulting in 130 years back, right? So, and Arthur D. Little has been involved in very, very significant projects. Arthur D. Little was the largest consulting firm till the late 1980s, right? And then companies like McKinsey, BCG, Bain, many of them are actually ex-Arthur D. Little partners who started companies like BCG and Bain. So these are all coming out of Arthur D. Little, but unfortunately, Arthur D. Little became much smaller and other firms have become much larger than Arthur D. Little after the 1980s. Yeah? And Arthur D. Little has done some very, very groundbreaking projects across the world. I can get into some of them if there is some interest. For me, I worked in Larsen. I did my engineering in Kerala, and then I worked with Larsen & Toubro for 4 years. I was also selected as a pilot officer with Indian Air Force, by the way. And then after working for a few years with Arthur D. Little, I did my MBA, and I joined Arthur D. Little in 1998. So I have been in consulting for the last 22 years. I started in Arthur D. Little, Singapore. They wanted to put me in India, but since I spent in US dollars in Australia, I had to earn in Singapore. So I refused to go to India just to recover the cost I incurred for my MBA. And so I started in Singapore, then moved to Malaysia, then few years in India. Then I did some consulting in Europe, primarily in Germany, in France, in UK. And mid 2006, 2007, I started the Middle East operations. We used to have an operations in the Middle East, but it closed around late 1990s, and I restarted the Middle East operations in 2005, 2006, and I have been running the Middle East operations since then. Yeah, so that is a short introduction about Arthur D. Little and what about myself. Yeah.
So great, Thomas. That's awesome. So I think two things that I want to pick up that you just mentioned is you had a career which has been global. You have worked in so many different countries, and also you have been in the consulting field. What do you have to say to our students about consulting as a career path? And how do you see consulting from a geographically diverse perspective?
First of all, just to be very clear in this discussion, I am going to give you very, very blunt, straight feedback, and which are my thoughts, right? I will never argue that what I'm saying is right or wrong. These are my own personal views, and everybody has their own views. You have your own perspectives, and it's for you to decide what is right or wrong, right? So about consulting, everybody tends to argue that consulting is one of the best jobs you can have, and things like that. But I will never mention that. In my personal opinion, every single job is equally good in my view, but there are differences between consulting and many other jobs in my view. The attractiveness to consulting is that consulting is a job in which I think you get most variety in a very short span of time, because you are going to work across multiple sectors, multiple geographies, and you tend to interact with very, very senior people in the industry, right? CEOs and management level people. And hence since your exposure is going to be across multiple sectors, very senior people working with very intelligent group of people, you tend to get very, very quick experience in consulting, right? So that is the advantage of consulting. But at the same time, since you go across multiple sectors and multiple geographies, sometimes there is a debate on whether you have got very, very deep expertise versus somebody who has been spending 10, 15 years working in a particular sector, in a particular geography, in a particular company. It is debatable, and sometimes I will even argue they tend to have a much more deeper experience versus whilst consultants have a much more wider experience right now. The second part of your question is about the geographies. Consulting, the fundamentals of consulting may remain the same, but depending on, it is actually not linked to the geography, it is more linked to the culture by which you need to adapt the consulting. For example, let me start by saying that if you do, when I was doing consulting in Singapore or Germany, the expertise that you bring in was much more important. Really, I'm not saying the relationship is not important, but the expertise you are bringing in and the consulting engagement tends to be a bit more transactional, because the client has the capability to understand what you're saying and they can get on with it and they can implement it. It's more like a healthy, intelligent, transactional conversation when you do in developed economies. But at the same time, when you come to Middle East or India, what the client needs is, they may think they know, but that is not correct. They are not very, very clear on what issues they're trying to address. So people tend to believe that consulting is you come up with a problem and the consultants are helping you to solve the problem. But majority of the time, you actually don't know the problem. And I have a personal view that if you actually know the problem, you can solve it. So in consulting, while people tend to argue that there is a problem to be solved, I always look at consulting saying that you actually don't know the problem, right? And 80 to 90% of the time, you're trying to really identify the problem, and then you need only 10 to 20% of the time to resolve the problem, right? So, and the difference is when you work in countries in the Middle East or places like India, there is much more importance given to the relationship and the trust aspect of it, because you need to have the clients explaining what is happening for you to identify the problem, right? Versus in a transactional place like in Singapore or Germany, they may tell you the problem and you can come up with a solution. But here the problem is, solving a problem is not a technical issue when you work in India or in China or in the Middle East. But when you go to Germany and Singapore, everywhere there is politics, there are games. I'm not saying it is not the case, but everywhere it is there. But in the developed economies, it is more your technical solutioning to the problem is much more important. Here, the solution has to work. You need to understand the fundamental issues. There are a lot more politics at game. There are softer factors in play, and you need to be really getting into a trusted mode with the client for the client to expose all the issues that you're facing. so that when you give a recommendation, it is implementable within the context, within the culture, within the country that we are giving the recommendation, right? So it is very, very different in almost every country. Even within Europe, when you go to Germany versus Eastern Europe, even in US, when you go to West and East, even in India, when you go to North and South, the consulting is different because the culture is different. The people behavior is very different. So even within the same country, when you go to different places, the type of consulting that you give will be very, very different. Yeah.
That's very very insightful, Thomas. It's very interesting. I was just thinking out as you were speaking. One thing that struck me is, what would you tell a student who wants to aspire to be, a consultant as a career, who is in school right now, in college right now, in a management program, or even in a engineering program? What should he or she do to prepare himself, herself? And similarly, what are the traits you are looking for in a person who wants to be a consultant?
First of all, I wish it's interactive, but I know we want to keep the questions towards the end. Before I try telling somebody what is required to become a consultant, I would like to know why the person is wanting to become a consultant, because that is where you should start from. Because in my view, there are perceptions about what is important and what is a good consultant. And unfortunately, at least when I was a student and when I'm interacting with students, and their perception about what is important for consulting and what is really important from my perspective are actually quite different, right? To start with, at least when I talk to students and ask them what is required to become a good consultant, they tend to give a lot more hard facts, hard factors, analytical rigor, intelligent, communication skills, perfectness and all of that. And it's more about your intelligence and the analytical capabilities and your communication skills that they tend to believe that it is very, very important, right? But at the same time, these are just threshold requirements for somebody to become a consultant, really threshold. The softer aspects of being a good human being is by far the most important criteria to become a consultant, right? To give you to explain to you how it really works is, like, let us say we are doing a consulting for Tata, the chairman of Tata, right? You're going to have a consulting with him, and you are trying to understand what issues they are facing and you're trying to solve the problem. The premise of the discussion is you need to have somebody who's sitting opposite to you who is 100 times better than you. Definitely the clients are 100 times better than the consultant, much more intelligent, much more achieved than you, much more older, much more senior than you, sitting in front of you and admitting to you that he has a problem. So you have to understand the dynamics between a very senior client person and a consultant. We are nowhere close to his personality to start with, right? Because these are people who have started companies which are worth 1,000 crores, 10,000 crores running a business. Consultants have not, sorry to put it very bluntly, they have not done anything. They have only told people what to do. There's a lot of difference in telling people what to do versus doing things. So I have a lot of respect for the clients that I'm talking to, and they're actually much better than you. And you need them to tell you that they have a problem, number one. And the reason of the problem, they cannot blame anybody because you're talking to the CEO or a board member. So he himself has created the problem to start with, right? You have to understand the dynamics of consulting. You're talking to somebody who is a very, very senior person, accomplished person, is coming and telling you that he has a problem. He cannot blame anybody because he's either the CEO or the board member. So he's a very smart, intelligent, senior person. He has a problem. He created the problem himself because he cannot blame anybody. The CEO cannot blame anybody. He doesn't know how to solve it. And he has to talk to somebody like you to solve it. It is not your intelligence that is coming in the play for him to have that discussion with you. And can you imagine Mukesh Ambani telling you, Thomas, I don't know how to run Jio Telecoms. Can you help me how to run it? Can you imagine that conversation? Can you really imagine that conversation? Is it my intelligence skills, my technical skills, my communication skills that come in way for Mukesh Ambani to tell me, Thomas, I have a problem with Jio Telecoms. I don't know how to solve it. Can you help me solve it? You have to really understand the premise of consulting, right? It is a very human touch, the personal aspect, the soft aspects of a human being that has to come in the conversation, that by which somebody at that stature should come and tell you that, Thomas, I don't know how to solve a problem for a Jio Telecom, right? And you have to understand whether you have that soft skills in you for you to become a consultant, right? You understand? So you have to be appreciating that there is a person sitting opposite to you who is much better than you, right? And you have to be very humble, simple, and non-threatening or non-posturing for the person to tell you something, for you to listen to it and tell him what to do in a very soft manner, right? And now let me make another statement which may sound a bit unfair. Extremely intelligent people and smart people tend to be a bit poor on team skills, unfortunately, right? Because they, what is the definition of somebody who is a class topper? Everybody has told him that you are the best everywhere, right? And why is that we work in teams? When we work in teams, we want people to share ideas. It's a group of people coming together to work together, share ideas, and come up with a solution. If somebody has been told from his birth that you are the most intelligent person in this world, class topper, university topper, IIT topper, IIM topper, MBA topper, you went to the job, you are the topper, he tends to be an individualistic player, because he has been told everybody you are the best and everybody around is not as good as you. So I don't need to discuss with others. I tend not to be a team player. I will never say 100% of the time, but the most intelligent people, they tend not to be a team player, and you cannot blame them. I'm not blaming the intelligent person. It is the people around us who has messed them up by telling them that you're too good, and every time you tell them you're a class topper, you got 10 out of 10, everybody else got 9.5, everybody else got 8, you are the dean lister, you are the gold medalist. So obviously he has the right to think that he's intelligent and others are really stupid. So why will I be a team player? Correct? You see where I'm coming from? I'm exaggerating the point for you to really understand the dynamics of this, right? So the point is that if you have to be a good consultant, you should have been topper throughout your life, very good, but nothing of this should have got into your head, which is almost impossible. It's almost impossible, right? But the moment it gets into your head, you are by far the worst consultant. You are a shitty consultant if it gets into your head. By this explanation, by definition, 95% of the people are bad consultants, because I am telling you that we need intelligent people, and 95% of the intelligent people are very egoistic and they are not team players. And I am saying that we need intelligent team players. I am eliminating 95% of the people already. You see, that is. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Sorry, my current supply dropped, so the light just went out. But I am on the internet, which is on the battery, so no problem. Yeah. So you need to really understand that you are extremely good, but none of that has gone into your head. And if you're not that type of a person, you will be a very bad consultant. You will be a bad consultant. The second point I wanted to make is, an intelligent person, is not easy for him to admit to mistakes. It's not easy, because he has normally not made mistakes. He's not used to making mistakes. That is why he's the class topper. You see what I'm saying? So when a consultant is interacting with a client or interacting with other people, and the client tells you, Thomas, I don't agree with what you're saying, it doesn't make sense to me, your immediate reaction is to counter and justify what you did, which is again a very bad quality of a consultant, right? Your immediate, when somebody tells you that, Thomas, in our own discussion today, when somebody is telling me, Thomas, what you're saying I'm disagreeing with, I should feel very excited about that statement. My posturing towards that statement, when somebody is telling me, Thomas, I think that you are wrong, I should be glowing with happiness. Wow, okay, somebody is telling me I'm wrong. okay, so what am I wrong? Can you please explain to me what I went wrong? I'm very excited to learn. I'm excited to correct myself. Okay, can you tell me? Okay, so I'm wrong. Thank you. You see what I'm saying? That posturing is very important, and you have to be very open to be criticized and correct yourself, which is again not normal for people who have been very successful. You see what I'm saying? So the point I'm trying to make is, while everybody says that I want to become a consultant, I want to become a consultant, if you go to the industry and talk to people, they say that we hate consultants. Generally, people hate consultants. And I'm not really surprised by that statement, because this is the mentality of 95% of the consultants, that I'm a gift by God to mankind or something like that. I don't understand, right? And then they create this aura around themselves, and they cannot make mistakes, and the whole personality is a bit messed up, right? For sure, I'm a little bit exaggerating my point. I'm a little bit exaggerating for the students to get the point. But you need to really understand the requirements of a consultant is very, very different than what we all think. It is about intelligence. It is about analytical skills. It is about communication skills. But that is not even 20% of what is required for somebody to become a good consultant, right? And so for somebody who wants to become a good consultant, you need to think through that, whether is this your personality, and if not, will you be able to adapt to that personality before you choose to become a consultant? Because if you become a consultant, it is better to be a good consultant than a bad consultant. So don't come into consulting if you think that your personality is not going to be suitable for that, right? Sorry,
Yes, okay. No, it's actually very again insightful and very uniquely put. So I think this is very useful. You know, we stress on life skills at Bennett and General. I mean, but our students don't sometimes understand how important it is to have these work-life skills. But absolutely. I want to kind of move, So I think you know, from being a team player, collaborative skills, analytical skills, critical thinking skills, I think they are much more valuable as far as I'm concerned when it comes to the longevity of those skills, as opposed to something which is very functional. But I have to ask you this question: what is your personal perspective on? We are talking COVID-19. We're talking digitization. Where do you think the world and your world of consulting is headed in due to these two events that have kind of unfolded in the recent times? Because I don't want to, get too much into conversations with you, because I totally agree with you, Thomas, that we need to open this up to interactions with the students and let them ask questions. So again, just what is your perspective of COVID-19/digitization on your world of consulting?
I will actually say that COVID has been good for consulting. There are some negative aspects, there are some positive aspects. As a consultant, we have been working with many clients to make some very fundamental business model changes, digitalization, coming up with digital strategies to transform the business model. And there are a lot of change management, software aspects, people management issues by which people are resisting to implement those fundamental changes. And because of COVID, they were forced to make some very fundamental changes, right? And because of this, because of COVID, there are many projects or sectors that we are supporting in which we have really made very fundamental changes by which they are doing business. And these fundamental changes has reduced the cost by at least 30 to 40%. I can explain to you any sector, we can get into the details, and I can explain to you almost mathematically any sector by which, because of COVID, you are forced to get into a digitalize or a digital strategy or a digitally driven transformation, and your savings or value creation is going to be at least 30 to 40%. So from that perspective, we are happy that we were able to push clients to change their model and improve the outcome and the value of the company by far, right? Now, from consulting perspective, there is definitely an issue of not able to meet people face to face. But in consulting, as I said, it is very, very important to bring in a lot of expertise, right? And in the past, let us say when we are doing a steering committee workshop with any of the client and we want to bring in an expert from the US for a half-an-hour workshop, he has to spend a week to come in from the US. Or I'm bringing one expert from Sweden, one expert from UK, one expert from US, and I'm trying to bring all of them for a meeting in Saudi Arabia. It is very complicated to arrange all those meetings, all right? Now with COVID, everything has become online. I am able to bring in the best experts. Anybody in the world can come in and participate in a discussion for 2 to 3 hours, and his effort is only 2 to 3 hours. He doesn't have to spend 3 days traveling and jet lagged and staying in the hotel and paying for business class flights. The cost has become less than half. The cost has become less than half, and the availability of expertise has tremendously increased, and the value creation from consulting has tremendously increased because of the whole philosophy. The negative part is that you're not having the personal, breakfast discussions, evening, going out, handling some very politically sensitive issues or organizational issues. Talking over a video call is not as effective as having a one-to-one discussion, going to their home, having a coffee in their own house, in their office. That is not there, right? But at the same time, that cannot be implemented. What I have started doing with my clients is I tell them, like, why don't we have dinner together? And the client actually finds it a little bit like a funny, but I tell them, no, you bring your own dinner, I will bring my own dinner, let us sit over the video conference, or you take a coffee. When you're having breakfast, tell me what time you're having breakfast. And I try to initiate casual discussions over the video call outside the official discussions. It may be a breakfast discussion, it may be a coffee discussion, it may be a dinner. The clients found it a bit funny in the beginning, but after 1 or 2 discussions, they realized that in those discussions, they can actually tell me, Thomas, this recommendation doesn't work. I have a big problem with my brother, and my son is like this, and my wife has this problem. They don't tell you in a meeting, right? And in the past, I used to be able to sit with them personally, but now it is not possible. And this coffee chats, I'm able to do it, right? So in summary, I can get into much more details depending on the questions. In summary, in the long run, it is very, very sad that in the short run, we are losing a lot of lives and all of that. In the short run, it is really, really a disaster, and it is very, very bad for people who has been impacted. So that is absolutely the case. But in the long run, what COVID is doing to us is really, really good. It has taught us that we can fundamentally make changes, right? It is not very difficult to make changes. You can run businesses in a completely different fashion overnight. Within 1 week, you can flip the whole business model. It is possible. It has taught us how to do it. It has taught us that some of the things that we were doing about flying and staying in hotels and trying to meet people need not be always as complicated as it used to be. Now, let me also touch upon the economic impact. See, the economic impact is definitely, all of us know, is negative because of COVID. But let me give you a perspective on why the economic impact will be positive in the medium term, 100% for sure. Let me explain to you my logic for saying that. The economic outcome is based on what productivity the population has based on the various resources that you have, right? Now, with COVID, the way we are running the business, we are forced to make it much more digital. And because it has been made digital, the output a person can produce has increased tremendously. Like, for example, let us take a very simple taxi ride that we're taking on Ola, right? Before digitalization, one taxi may make 2 to 3 trips to the airport. Today, he makes 6 to 7 trips because it's all connected, right? Earlier, see, if you take, I can give this explanation for any sector, but I will make it very simple because taxi rides, everybody can easily understand. Before this Ola or Uber came in place, around 50% of the time, the people are searching for a passenger, right? We are searching for a passenger. Today, 90% of the time, the passenger's in the taxi. The taxi is not roaming around, right? So the taxi driver, his productivity has almost doubled. Technically, when his productivity has doubled, the value he is creating is much higher than before. which means the GDP per capita in the steady state produced by that person has to significantly increase. And by digitalization, all the repetitive, non-intelligent tasks are being pushed to the machine. The moment you're pushing it to the machine, the type of work that human beings do are much more value-added activities, by which the value of the outcome is going to be higher, which is an impact on the GDP or the economic outcome of a country, right? So in the medium to long term, the impact of COVID is 100% positive in my view. But we have to go through this very, very tough time in the meanwhile, right? Because people lose jobs and the GDP is coming down. But the economy and the people are adapting towards a much more efficient, effective way of running a business, minimizing wasted resources and capital investments. Right? Yeah. In case some of them are not clear, or if you disagree, let me know, because maybe I'm wrong in some of the things. Maybe I'm making some wrong assumptions, right? And I'll be happy if somebody can, counter this or argue, Thomas, there are 1 or 2 points you're making, I disagree with it, and I'm very happy to get into a discussion and even correct some of the statements I'm making in case it has some fundamental flaws in that. Yeah.
Sir, you're on mute.
Yeah, I was saying, do we want to move to interactions with the students right now, or do we continue our chat? What's the timeline like?
No, I'm completely flexible. It's completely your decision how you want to handle it. Let me just give you one more on consultants, because that is very I thought, because there was an earlier discussion about consultants, and since I'm assuming that almost all of them on this discussion are from India, right? And I have worked a lot with in the Middle East office. There are consultants coming in from 22 countries, right? And I also had a lot of consultants from India, and I thought it is very important to give this input. I can tell you that when I'm working with consultants across the globe, across 22 countries, I can tell you that the most intelligent and the most analytically rigorous, thorough people are coming in from India. But unfortunately, we don't give importance to structured communication and presentation skills, right? And why I'm saying this is because I just thought I'll give you this feedback, because when I also hire people from Harvard Business School and London Business School and INSEAD and all of them, and I do hire a lot of students from India, right? In the beginning, I can see that while we tend to have very, very good analytical skills and technical skills, since we don't give importance to communication, we tend to seem not as good as people coming in from Harvard Business School or something like that. And it has nothing to do with the intelligence. It is purely to do with our communication skills. And what I have noticed over 2 to 3 to 4 years, it actually flips. Because the people coming in from India over a period of 2 to 3 years understands the importance of communication, and then they become much better than others, because the basic intelligence, analytical skills, hardworking thoroughness is there. As a basic, they're already better. And the why I'm saying this is because we don't, it was my own issue also when I joined Arthur D. Little. We don't give importance to communication skills, and let me spend a minute on that so that you really hopefully appreciate the importance of communication. And in my view, I'm generalizing a lot. It's definitely not 100% correct. There may be many people who are not falling in this category. We always have a tendency to be 100% complete in our analysis. But what is very important is that in a consulting setup or in our own communication today, the outcome is dependent on what you understood versus what I analyzed. So even if you have done a 100% thorough analysis, and my communication skills, I have not prepared the slides very well, the PowerPoint slides graphically to present it correctly, and I communicated only 50% of it, the audience have got only 50% of my analysis. So you being thorough and 100% correct is useless if the recipient has not got 100%, right? So you have to always give importance that whatever you are becoming thorough, if you're making it too complicated and you're not able to communicate it, I will make a very blunt statement that it is useless, because what you learn is irrelevant. Today in our communication, what I know about consulting is irrelevant. What you understand from what I'm saying is more important. If I'm not able to communicate and I'm a guru in consulting, this conversation is useless, right? I'm good, so what? I'm not able to communicate it properly. Then my knowledge is useless in this discussion, right? I'm sorry, I'm stressing this point because I feel very strongly about this, and we have to give a lot of importance to this. The second point on the same topic is when you're interacting with very senior people, they have very limited time. Let us take the same example of Mukesh Ambani, for example. He will not give you more than 10-15 minutes to have a conversation with him. And you may have to work for 6 months to prepare for a meeting with him. So you have to be able to synthesize all your 6 months of thorough analysis into a 15 minutes communication when you're having a discussion with a board member. And hence the importance of communication is extremely high. And generally people like me and you who have basically come in from India tend to be a bit weaker on communication skills. And it is very, very important to brush up those skills and understand that it is important. It is not a wastage of time, because we sometimes make fun of people like you're trying to, giving a lot of importance to presentation. You don't have any content, you're a lot of bullshit and all of that. That's not correct. You have to give a lot of importance to communication also. Correct? Yes, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I think we should now probably move to taking some questions from the participants.
Thank you, sir. I would like to thank Mr. Kuruvela and Dr. Agarwal again for this amazing chat. This discussion has truly enhanced our knowledge in the field of consulting and its dynamics. What does it take to be a good consultant, and also regarding the economic impacts of COVID-19 pandemic and its direct relation with the gradual but positive creation of value through digitalization. It has truly helped us understand the important measures and innovative strategies that should be implemented by consultants, the budding consultants at undergraduate and graduate level, of course, business professionals, economists, and other related people. This has moved us all, and I'm sure with these learnings, our attendees would have several questions and thoughts popping up in their minds. So without a wait, I would like to request Shrestha and Vachi to please take over the charge and begin with the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dhriti. So hello everyone, and we'll be proceeding with the Q&A session now. I would request all the students to ask as many questions as you want to, and all the students who want to ask a question, please raise your hand and we'll unmute you. And students who are not able to unmute themselves at the moment, you can type down your questions on the chat box. And introducing myself, I'm Shrestha Monty. I'm the class representative of the MBA batch 2020-2022. I'm also the student representative of the Playcom committee and also the industry commitment committee at Bennett. And now I'll be passing it on to Vachi Singhal, who's my colleague, and who will be asking the first question. And then all the students who want to ask questions, please raise your hand, because opportunities like these don't come every day. So make the most of it. Vachi, on to you now.
Good evening, everyone. Hope I'm audible. Thank you so much, Thomas sir, for sharing such insights, and I personally learned so much. I am Vachi, and I'm the member of placement committee as well as the industry engagement committee. And so my question to you would be that the businesses that are coming up in the near future who are building recently a post-pandemic situation, what is the role that will help them accelerate into entering these new markets, because the situation has completely changed, and how can they expect the new customers to behave in this new scenario? Me being a business student.
I'm quite convinced that the small and medium scale and the new businesses are the ones who are going to fundamentally benefit from all these changes, right? See, I don't know whether, let me tell you where I'm coming from. any company or even people who have been in a particular situation find it very, very difficult to change. Just take the top 10 companies. Why is that in the top 10 companies, it is all the companies that are very new? Why is it Amazon and Facebook and all these Google and all these companies have suddenly overtaken all the companies who have been 100 years, 120 years in this world? Because we tend to apply an old philosophy and we find it very difficult to change. So for me, it is not that it is difficult for new people to come in. It is actually the best time for people like you. I think students like you have an advantage over people like me who have 15, 20 years experience, because my experience is getting irrelevant. It is relevant when the trends are going to be the same. So my experience in a particular business, right? My experience in telecoms, in transportation, in healthcare, it is relevant if we believe that the business model in the past is going to be continuing, and Thomas, your experience is relevant and you know what to do. No, that's all gone. It's actually negative form. It's actually corrupting my mind. So it is always good to always start from a clean sheet of paper. What is really required to run the business, and rely on digitalization, digital transformation, try to automate everything as much as practically possible, eliminate human intervention. Human intervention is extremely costly for anything. It creates mistakes. The learnings is not kept, but the moment it is automated, it is digitalized, or artificial intelligence comes in, anytime you make a mistake, you correct it and it gets into the system. Right? So for me, it is really good for new businesses, ability to, because they're not corrupted, the ability to turn around and come up with completely drastically new ways of doing business, have an advantage going forward. So it is already good, right? Number two, there was a question on the Q&A about small and medium scale organizations, right? It is actually very good for them because digitalization allows people to consolidate without physical consolidation, right? What is the problem of a small company versus a big company? It is size. But technically, let us say you have one small little restaurant. Today, you're one small little restaurant, you're struggling. But the moment you link to Zomato, you are not a small scale, you are fighting it out. You are a part of a huge company who is delivering food, right? So there's nothing called, in my view, small company and large company, as long as you get connected to the digital setup, right? So but if you remain as a small and medium scale company, you are detached from the whole connected world, then you will die. You will really, really die, right? May not be now, but in the medium term to long term, right? But if you get connected in the digital world, being an SME is actually quite good because you don't have the overheads and all of that. You get connected into a digital system. You have visibility across the whole globe on customers, supply chain, and all of that. And you will get the benefits of becoming a large player, example, right? So there is no disadvantage. Actually, it is very good for small and medium scale companies. Yeah.
That's really insightful, sir. So all those budding entrepreneurs, I hope you are listening and making notes of it. So it's the right time to enter the market. I hope you'll do that. Over
Absolutely.
to you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir.
Moving on, we have one question from Mohil Nagpal who's saying, sir, as we are talking about the Indian markets, what do you think will happen to these small scale businesses and their future growth, as it's difficult for them to change their business model due to small margins and limited reach? This is a question from Mohit.
Okay, I think I'm sorry, I have to repeat the answer I gave you earlier. The small and medium scale organizations have to get integrated into the digital economy. The moment you're integrated to the digital economy, your game is completely changing. See, I already gave you an example of a taxi. See, let me explain that. Maybe it is very obvious, but let me give you 3-4 examples and then you'll realize what I'm talking about. A taxi, a small and medium scale taxi is a taxi with one taxi or two taxis. When he gets integrated into Uber and Ola, he is able to do 3 to 4 times double the transaction. he's able to get double the income, or the margin is going to go up. Talk about a hotel today. A hotel in the past, the number of customers a hotel used to service versus now, it has more than doubled with the same capacity. Same capital investment in a hotel is able to serve double the customers because he's connected to Zomato or something like that. The kitchen is producing much more. Only 20 to 30% of them are eating in the restaurant, 70 to 80% are eating at home, and hence he's able to service 2 to 3 times the capacity he used to supply as a small scale hotel. Today he's getting a lot of money. Take a hospital. Today, a hospital, let us say you're servicing 10 patients today. Because of digitalization, the customers are entering the data on their own. Some of them are talking to the doctor over the phone, over the video. Today, actually, we have done a strategy for a hospital in Dubai. You don't have to go to the hospital unless the doctor has to take your temperature or something like that. If it is something very simple, the temperature, the equipment to take all this temperature is available at home. So you take your minimum whatever, call the doctor, he talks to you over the video, he prescribes the medicine, you place an online order for the medicine, it gets debited to your, the medicine is delivered to your home, right? Half an hour is all that is required for you to talk to a doctor, get the medicine prescribed, and the medicine comes to you. In the past, it used to take 2 to 3 to 4 hours. In the hospital also, you used to spend 1.5 to 2 hours. Now you are not spending any time. At least 1/3 of them don't even go to the hospital. And whoever goes to the hospital, you don't go to the reception. You're entering the data over the internet. It gets there. You go there. You're directly allocated to a doctor. You don't go to the reception. You don't want to talk to anybody. You go to the doctor, meet him, and you come out, right? Real estate, parking lots. You can take any sector you take, you digitalize, the savings is 30 to 40%. And the savings is independent of whether you are a small scale player or a large scale player, because you are connected in the whole economy. You don't need to have economies of scale on your own. The hotel doesn't need, the system gave you, the Zomato gave you the economies of scale, Ola gave you the economies of scale, Amazon gave you the economies of scale. You see what I'm saying, right? So there is no issue for that, right?
Okay, I see Nandini has raised her hand. Nandini, please ask your question.
Good morning, sir. I'm a first year BTech student. I had a few questions. I've been noting down your points about culture and communication. So social distancing is inevitable for quite a long time now, and there is no denying it. An issue that needs addressing in the current business market is the declining importance of intellectual labor, that is management. To small businesses, it makes perfect sense to pay just $100 a month to get an online management service, which can schedule meetings and schedule various tasks for the entire business operation. It makes more sense to pay $100 than to hire a project manager and give them thousands of dollars a month. What kind of effect will it have in the future with the already globally declining GDP mixed with the lack of importance for the intellectual labor?
Are you saying that there is intellectual labor is declining? Is that
no, sir. No, sir. The intellectual labor is not declining. The impression of intellectual labor is declining. I'll give you more context with this. Since there are like the new businesses, if an entrepreneur wants to start, the first thing that comes to mind is take the business online. And with tools like Google and Microsoft, a lot of management tasks are completed, the basic management tasks. So there's a misconception amongst the young entrepreneurs that they don't have to pay for management and they can just pay services like Google and Microsoft to help them, or even other services that help manage business on a small scale.
That is, no. So first of all, let us also be very, very, very clear, right? That whenever you are digitalizing or whenever you are even implementing artificial intelligence, the source is human thinking, right? So that is, at the end of it, you're still optimizing, making it efficient, doing it much faster, and you're eliminating predictive, repetitive tasks. It is not eliminating the requirement of intelligent thinking. Not at all. That is completely, and if somebody thinks that I want to start a new business and I will give everything to Google and Microsoft, we are only outsourcing the predictive, repetitive tasks, because these are things at the end of it, these are softwares which are working towards pre-programmed algorithm. So it doesn't have, it has an intelligence that is already pre-fed into that, right? So you still, for me, it is quite obvious that you still need to seek for management advice if you need it. Maybe the people who are becoming the entrepreneur already are very good in their topic and you need to have breakthrough thinking, and you may not have to go for management advice if you're good. But whether you bring it or whether somebody from outside brings it, eliminating management advice is completely ridiculous, right? Because that is not what is happening with this digitalization, right? I'm repeating, it is you're only outsourcing predictive or repetitive tasks. And intelligence, intelligence is not a predictive repetitive task, or management thinking is not a repetitive predictive task, right? So you cannot outsource it. Absolutely, you cannot.
Yes, sir. So for businesses that adopted to this new era of digitalization, having the work from home culture, would some Indian companies be willing to provide work from home as an option to be continued post COVID crisis? Or do we need to enforce additional rules and regulations to ensure the work-life balance and timings in the work from home culture? Most of the employees are overworked and the timings are made flexible, which is usually spans out to the entire day. And the Indian work culture and the Indian HR system is really transparent with these things. And in my own experience, I have not seen a lot of strict boundaries in the work from home culture. What is your take on that?
See, the HR aspect or the stress that is happening on people, that has to be really, really managed. But the significance of work from home will remain and it will continue, in my view. We actually, can you hear me well? Because there was a disturbance in between. Yeah, you can hear me, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. See, we actually did a very extensive survey. Just, if you don't mind, I can actually, just give me a second. Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
See, I will just show you a slide. Approximately 50% of the people versus today will continue working from home. 77% of the people are happy to continue working from home, but only 50% of them are effective. Some of them were, it means that only 50% of working from home is actually effective and better than working from the office, but 50% is better to work from the office. 50% is better to work from home. This is actually based on a very elaborate survey across multiple sectors, right? So in my view, in the steady state, 50% of what is happening today as work from home will continue to be work from home, in my view, because it is much more efficient, cheaper, less cost. You don't have to spend a lot of time on communicating, like in Bombay or Delhi or all those places, you're spending 3 to 4 hours to communicate. So all of that is you're getting saved. But at the same time, the issue that you need to address is that the home environment that you have today, in which you're not distinguishing your office workspace from home space, is not okay. You have to distinguish that. You cannot just convert your bedroom and make it a work office. That is really creating an impact. So in Arthur D. Little, let me tell you what we do. We actually encourage people to work from home, right? We actually ask them to keep the cameras on. Even if there's, see, normally we keep the camera on when we are having a conversation like this, correct? In Arthur D. Little, when we are doing a consultancy engagement, and a team of 5 people are working together on an engagement, all of them have to come to their own desk by around 9 o'clock, and they have to keep the camera on. They have to be dressed properly, and we actually take attendance. Not like a serious school attendance. We are consultants, grown-up people, but you are expected to be at your workplace at home. So we are definitely trying to create a culture of systematic working in the home and not getting the distractions of the home, number one. Number two, we actually have a lot of activities. We have games, we actually have food, we have drinks, we have lunch, we have dinner. We actually have some games. We actually in Arthur D. Little today, we are actually having a game. There's actually an Apple Watch, which is given to every ADL employee. Every ADL employee has been given an Apple Watch. I'm connected to a system. There's a competition created between all Arthur D. Little employees in an office, and whoever is running the most will get an iPad for free, for example, right? So we are also, even though you're working from home, we are creating an environment so they're very healthy. So people are forced to run, forced to take exercise. You cannot manually enter it. It is automatically captured by the Apple Watch. It goes into the system. And I have a list of all my employees. In my, there is an app in which I can track how many of them have done exercise, calories, and all of that, right? And we are not doing it in a negative way. We are doing it in a very healthy fashion. And I will call somebody and say, hello, you have not moved for the last 2 days, man. It is very unhealthy. You see what I'm saying? Is there any problem you're facing, right? So in my view, 50% of what is happening will continue to be at work from home, but there should be a very, very systematic way to address the issues and the fatigues and the unhealthiness that is accompanying this work from home. You need to distinguish your work time, workspace at home, and you need to somehow manage extracurricular activities to keep your mind and body healthy. In Arthur D. Little again, we have once in a week, we have collective yoga classes. Collective yoga classes. Everybody has to do some exercise. The camera is on, I can do yoga, I can do running, I can do jump, whatever. We actually cook as a team. We come and drink, we come and have breakfast, all of that. We do all of that, right? Because when the COVID started, after 1 or 2 or 3 months, I started realizing that I don't find my consultants like as sharp, as intelligent. They're all, I can feel a little bit sluggishness in their thinking. And then we went through this process and we implemented a lot of ideas like this. We do yoga, we have food, we have activities, we track your calorie movements and all of that. We gave them, exercise units at home. We gave them watches to track things. So you have to handle that part. If you don't handle it, it will be very bad. It will be horrible. But if you handle it, work from home will continue and it will have its own benefits. You cannot do everything work from home. A significant amount of things that you are doing from office can easily be done at home and you will save a lot, and it is actually very good. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir, for answering all the questions. I would like to invite Dhriti now to take over the session and for the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Shrestha. And thanks a lot, sir. It was indeed a very, very engaging session with you today. I'm pretty sure by now all of us, especially the students, might have broadened their knowledge and even perspectives about the upcoming business opportunities during and post-COVID. It was truly a moving talk, and I think it is the way it is, since it's almost time to conclude. And as the topic says, the economic impact of COVID-19. Despite great losses, I feel that I can state it this way, that COVID is going to give us positive returns in the future. And despite the personal and the social life drawbacks that we are facing right now, the new normal life and the so-called term, the low growth world, might actually get transformed to a high growth world, I feel. So on the same note, I would now request Mr. Sudhanshu Verma for the final vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dhriti. So Mr. Thomas, a huge big thanks from Bennett University for having made time, and also a big thanks to Prabhu. If my calculation is not wrong, it's too early in the morning for him to be on this call. This is the reality of the virtual world, of the digitalization we've been talking about. So Thomas, by the way, Prabhu is right now on the West Coast. So
okay.
Time this meeting started, Prabhu, correct me, I think it was 4:30 a.m. at your time.
Correct.
Good. I only hope Prabhu doesn't bring this practice when he comes back. And we all
I'm very,
at 4:30 in the morning to do this.
I'm very much going to do that.
So a few things, which really stuck, and so I don't know, maybe a coincidence, but I spent about 3-4 years of my life being an independent consultant. And a lot of things I really loved about what you said. Class toppers can't become good consultants. So thankfully, I was not a class topper. So, and they cannot, kind of connect with people. So I really thank my stars I didn't top my classes. But the critical thing, which really hit home. So it's all about being a good human, and I would say humane.
Right.
And it is what all you talked about, the things that are happening in the consulting world, the requirements that people need to have to be a good consultant. I think a lot of it gets very easily correlated to even our other parts of work. You need to be human, whether you're a consultant or not, or whether you're in any other industry. Because I think the key to being human is that you should be able to make a connection with the people. And it's not just a connection which you need to make as a consultant, it's also a connection you need to make as a team leader, as a manager, as a team player. And these are things which go a long way. One of the sayings we used to have in one of my earlier companies I used to work with, the Levers, was that, if you have your team on your side, 75% of your work is done. The rest 25% is all about, as you said, the 20% is all about giving a solution. The 80% is of finding the problem. So other interesting stuff which you said was, this whole COVID situation, though on the short term is very distressing, but there are very new type of effective ways of working which has come in. And my only input on that to everyone over here would be that we should not forget the good things that we've learned given this phase. And we should not therefore neglect them and go back to the old ways of working. The point which you showed on your slide of, the 50% people would love to work from home here on. I have personally chatted with 4 or 5 of our friends who are entrepreneurs. And your percentages are actually accurate to the last decimal point. 50% of their people got back to them saying, we are very happy working from home. Why do you want to open the office all over again? So these are realities of life. We need to, I think, learn, adapt, be flexible. And it's the new way of working. We cannot be steadfast and say, this is how I work, this is how I'll continue working. And of course, the whole point about structured communication and presentation skills, very well taken. And I think that is something which Prabhu and Rakesh and their teams are working very hard. And very, very precise inputs you've given. I'm sure we'll all benefit by it. And I would also request you to please give us these kind of opportunities more and more, so that we can get you to talk to the younger generation and they can gain by the wisdom that you've shared with us. So once again, many thanks on behalf of the university. And many thanks to you also, Prabhu, for making time so early. And we look forward to many more such interactions. And maybe next time on, we'll make them even more interactive. 1 hour may have been too short, but thanks so much. And I'm ever so grateful to you for your time.
Really, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the discussion. And as I said, these are just my views. Apply your own judgment to these views, because I don't think that something is right or wrong. And I really enjoyed the discussion and privileged to have this interaction with all of you. And for sure, I'll be happy to have more sessions anytime. Just let me know. And I can easily be connected anytime. I'm available on LinkedIn. Just my name and Arthur D. Little. Feel free to connect. I'll be happy to interact with all of you at any point of time. And again, thank you very much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. And I really enjoyed the discussion. I also learned while trying to explain things and answer the questions, you learn more things. So again, thank you all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you, Rakesh, and your team for coordinating this event also. Thank you, Rakesh.
Thank you so much for your presence, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.